Founders Forum, episode 18.
Open your mind to a new episode of the Founders Forum, the podcast championing a free economy, sound assets, and blockchain solutions. Each week, your hosts, entrepreneur Cole Snell and economist Bob Murphy, interview pioneers and free thinkers to help you develop into the architect of your future.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Founders Forum. Today, Cole and I are pleased to have a conversation with Zuhayr Rashid, who is the Chief Technology Officer of, drumroll please, Infineo. And we had Zuhar on because I thought it was appropriate for us to be talking about ChatGPT and just AI in general, in terms of the economic and human implications of it, or social, I guess, because he really is an expert in this stuff, which has come out, when we've had our team meetings and he's been talking about various elements of how AI is affecting our own business. And so we thought this would be a great topic for business owners in general to hear. So let me just read from the profile at the team section at the Infineo website. So Zuhar is a self-taught programmer who has won multiple hackathons, both blockchain-based and traditional. He learned to code in his early teens and has worked in and around the blockchain space since 2016. His first foray into the competitive programming world was a McGill Computer Science Bootcamp hackathon during high school, which his team won by designing an AI-based spaceship to avoid a simulated asteroid field. Most recently, he won the first place prize of $1 million for the Phantom Developer Conference hackathon in 2021 in competition against 10 plus other blockchain engineering teams. The product he built was a hedge fund portfolio position aggregator that represented positions within a diverse portfolio across both centralized and decentralized blockchain exchanges. He leads the Infineo technology team with his experience in full stack programming and fluency in various modern programming languages and frameworks. And so it's probably appropriate that his high school championship involved an AI programmed spaceship that avoided an asteroid field, because in a sense, that's what he's going to be telling you as a business founder or owner in this episode, is how you can use AI to avoid all of those minefields and asteroids in your business environment. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Zuhar. Well, Zuhar, welcome to the Founders Forum podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, we have already given folks the introduction to who you are, so let's dive right into the interesting stuff. So recently, there have been a few people who have been prompting me. One is Spencer Schiff, and he said I could talk about the fact that he's been doing this behind the scenes, has just been telling me, and he's been saying it publicly about, hey, real GDP is going to go up 1,000% within the next decade. And he doesn't mean cumulative, he means like in a given year, and because he sees all these advances. And then the other person whose opinion I really respect is you, Zuhar, who have been telling the Infineo team periodically, you guys got to see what this ChatGPT can do. This is amazing. And so can you just speak a little bit about your own experience with it? And well, maybe what is it for people who've heard the buzzword? They really don't know what we're talking about, but then, some of your experiences with it and why you realized, well, wow, this is, to use a cliche, a game changer.
Yeah, sure. So just to start off with the acronym, GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And it basically is a fancy way of saying that it takes input and it generates output text. And so basically it predicts the next word. And that sounds like a very simple principle, but in reality, what that produces is very complex results. And that's also sort of a feature of nature generally, where nature has very simple rules and produces very, very complex results. And so it sort of mimics that, just like humans do in a lot of ways. But in terms of what it does at the very base level, it doesn't sound very exciting. It predicts the next word. But what you can use it for is the very, very, very exciting part. And you talked about GDP. I mean, he might be underestimating the impacts of the technology. And so I'm also very cautious about getting hype or the hype around new technologies, because I've lived through various cycles in terms of the technology world, and I've seen all the fakes and all the sort of bluster around various game-changing things. But the thing is with this, it's it is the real deal in a lot of ways. And we've seen it at our company at Infineo really make a dollar, to quantify it, make $29 do what $1,000 used to do, just in the first few weeks of us implementing it. And there's a lot more to come in terms of efficiency when it comes to business. But even generally, really, it's just an order of magnitude improvement in many, many different domains. And you could just say it's an outsourcing of intelligence. Whereas before you had outsourcing of sort of more basic tasks, calculations, things like this. And now you can outsource intelligence to a model that takes a fraction of the cost that a human would and a fraction of the time simultaneously. And so the efficiencies there are astronomical if you know how to extract them. And that's a key. Generating the right prompts, understanding how the system works is key to actually getting the right output. So in programming, we have terminology called GIGO. So garbage in, garbage out. If you don't know how to prompt the system, if you don't know how to put in the right inputs, it's not going to give you the outputs you want. And part of that is understanding how the model works at the sort of base level. So it's an LLM. ChatGPT is an instance of an LLM, which is a large language model. And these large language models predict text. But the way they're structured is that, like, some people compare them to search engines. That's not accurate at all, really. They're not there to search for data. They're not really there to warehouse data even. These are just artifacts of the fact that they've been trained on trillions of lines of text on the web. They are there to reason about data. And so that's their specialty. And if you understand how to use that specialty in tandem with things like search engines, etc., you can really generate really, really good results. But you have to understand what it is and what it's not. So yeah, that's the sort of quick summary about it. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just, and I know, Cole, we're excluding you here for a second, but there's got to be a chat between the three of us, a chat 3.0. But just for people, because this is something that, yeah, you specifically taught me, Zuhar, like through your example, was when I started playing around with these things, I was doing, stuff like, are you computers going to take over the world? Or what's your plan for conquering humanity? Goofy stuff like that. And it would say, no, it is against my programming to do that. And then I would argue with it, like the reasons it would give me for why it couldn't possibly be a threat to us. Like we're invalid, you know what I mean? Like I would poke holes in its argument and stuff. And haha, that's what I did. But the stuff you were doing, Zuhar, like we had to send an email to somebody and you had this really diplomatically crafted flowing thing that was perfect. And I said, oh, that's just the way to use it. I use ChatGPT to do that. And I was astonished because I was like, it's not like there was some website somewhere that it got trained on where there was that scenario. Like clearly it seemed like it was novel. And you showed me the prompt you gave it. And the prompt was almost as long as the email that it generated, but yet it was doing work. Like in other words, it was a useful exercise for you to, and so that's something that wouldn't have occurred to me. I would have thought, oh, the whole point of these things is you put in like one sentence and then it gives you an essay. And you showed me that no, depending on the task, you have to tell it exactly what you want. And knowing that this thing is trained on one would not have thought that you being so specific in the prompting would be so critical, and yet it is. So I don't know, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So really, what's interesting is that what we said was that the prompt was almost as long as the response. So truly, like these things are seen as things that will reduce workload. I think that they will optimize the amount of output you can get for a certain number of inputs, but I think they will ultimately end up increasing workload in a very beneficial way. So like I might do more work crafting a prompt than I might have done to generate the resulting output if I was to do it myself. But the prompt may be such that the output that's generated, if it's high quality prompt, the output that generated is much higher quality than I could have done myself. Or it sort of intuits, the large language model intuits certain things in the structure of the output that I wouldn't have known myself. So I think what it is it's a multiplying force on intelligence. I don't think it necessarily replaces intelligence, at least not yet. And part of prompt engineering, which is a term that's recently been coined, it's sort of a quote unquote field that's just emerged as a result of these technologies. It's probably a couple months old now. Prompt engineering. I joke with my friends that it's the shortest lasting field in existence because what I did was partially when I was generating the prompt to feed it in to get the desired output, I asked it to iterate on its own prompt and give me the most optimal prompt given that I wanted this output. And so that field, probably all the prompt engineers will be fired next week and they were all hired maybe two months ago. Just as an example, it's like the AI is now consuming the meta task that you needed to do to generate the correct outputs. And so this hierarchical level of intelligence and planning will continue. And actually to that effect, OpenAI, which is the lab behind GPT, has just released just an article called the governance of superintelligence, which is really ominous sounding. But I mean, the natural conclusion of hierarchical intelligence structures is sort of governance, right? You have the lowest level, which is maybe just basic calculations. Then you have some planning around those calculations. Then you have design planning around the app or the program that does those calculations. Then you have entire corporations, and there's a few steps in between, but entire corporations that do a bunch of planning and shape the economy in certain ways. Then you have government, and then you have regulation and superintelligence that presides over it all. And the key thing to take away here is that these hierarchical stages of intelligence are, by the sort of, I guess, commonly accepted understanding of what intelligence is based on these AIs, they're not fundamentally different in nature than doing a math problem. They're just at a very, very large scale relative to the base math problems. And so that's what I'm sure some of you've heard people say, that this is just an upscaled version of what was discovered in the 1940s around neural nets. Really, the base principle around AI has not changed. Around this sort of form of AI has not changed since the 1940s. What changes are compute power. Our computability has grown so much that now the models that were projected to work in the 1940s are actually being able to be implemented today. And because of that, we've scaled up so much. The principles are the same. They're fundamentally just very simple matrix calculation, but the compute power has changed, and therefore you're able to establish these weird and complex results from these very simple principles. And that's really how, I guess, a lot of people theorize intelligence, higher level intelligence operates. It's just a bunch of smaller things sort of blown up into large scale. Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. It's a different theory than you would intuit naturally. You'd think that high level intelligence is something completely fundamentally different than like a very basic level of intelligence. But I mean, the way that these models are producing outputs, people don't even know. The developers don't even know what's going on inside their black boxes. This is what they call it. You just put it in input. They've just trained it on a bunch of GPUs and you get an output. We don't know what's happening in the interim. And it's just a bunch of scaled up calculations. And so it really does stand to reason that if this is what it's producing, and those of you who've tried at ChatGPT know how amazing some of the results are, it stands to reason that this may actually be the way intelligence is formed in the natural world.
What would happen if a, say, fully scaled out version of ChatGPT 4, say like the version of ChatGPT 4 in a year from now that you're kind of describing, and a quantum computer were to start dating and they had a child? What would happen to our passwords at our local bank? And would they be able to, get access to our checking account, a child of ChatGPT 4 and a quantum computer, and email money transfer all of their friends our money?
So that's a really interesting question. So quantum computing and general artificial intelligence, or AGI, are two distinct threats, but there is a threat. I say threats because there is a definite threat and also opportunity. And I think there's two sides of the coin to anything, like nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, right? So you have two sides of the coin to all these things, but I think that there is a chance of interplay. I mean, any sort of sufficiently intelligent superintelligence will iterate on the current state of quantum computing and break all of our passwords, break into all of our bank accounts to maximize some optimization function, which is maybe to generate as much money as possible. If someone puts that into a superintelligence, maybe they will do some science. The superintelligence will do some science as a result, as a sub goal. So the way that these AGIs would work theoretically is like you have sub goal to reach your end goal. And if your end goal is to maximize the amount of money you have, maybe your sub goal is develop on the existing knowledge base of quantum computing to the point where now you can break all encryption, steal all the money out of everybody's bank account, and maximize the amount of money that you have, right? So like that is a definite threat. And there's a lot of threats like that are sort of uncountable. But quantum computing is a looming threat to any sort of digital security. And it's something that quantum safe cryptography is a field that's really in development right now. There are not many quantum safe algorithms, but it is a thing that needs to be addressed in the next 10 years, or we're all going to be, the entire internet security model is just absolutely going to be obsolete. And that's going to pose dangers for everything, not just banking, not just crypto, not just It's just absolutely everything on the internet depends on cryptography that could be broken by quantum computing in the future. So yeah, I won't get into qubits or anything deep, but because it'll take too much time. But yes, the marriage would be dangerous.
Well, can just a maybe different approach to Cole's, the spirit of what Cole was asking there is, I know we both listened, Zuhar, to Stephen Wolfram, who's recently been on Lex Friedman's podcast, and then Tom Woods is the one that just dropped as we're recording this. We listened. So he's, for folks who don't know, he developed Mathematica, Wolfram Alpha, making very powerful mathematical engines, that you can program with more natural language. That's what his career has been, or one aspect of it. And so what they're doing now is they're developing a plugin for ChatGPT, like to give it mathematical abilities. And that might surprise people because, well, but it's a supercomputer. Well, no, the thing that's funny is, and this is kind of underscores that no, the ChatGPT per se is just really having to do with text. That if you ask it, in some cases, if you say what's 2 + 2, like it can sometimes say 2 + 2 = 5. Like I've seen, like it won't say it right off the bat. It'll say 4 because that's the most common response to that question. But there's ways you can get it to say, and then you can say to it, that's not correct, it's 4, and it'll apologize and say, oh yes, you're right, 2 + 2 is 4, my mistake. Which it's just a weird thing. You wouldn't think a computer would get a basic arithmetic, but the issue is because the way it's answering direct math questions is not calculating it. It's instead using this really cumbersome and we don't understand black box method. It answers it the same way if you said make a haiku in the style of Tone Loc. The way, however it would do that is the same way if you say what's the square root of 49. It's the same basic thing. It's not that it has one subroutine that handles mathematical problem. So what Stephen Wolfram is trying to, his name's Stephen, right? I'm not inventing that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah. He's doing a plugin. And so it's like, in other words, once the ChatGPT like becomes, it gives the appearance of being somewhat self-aware and can say, oh, this is just a straight up math problem. It will know to use the plugin and have access, just like a human would realize, oh yeah, I don't know what the square root of 6-digit number is, but I can just go use the computer to do that. Like if the ChatGPT gets to that level where it can distinguish, oh wait, this is a math problem. I know how to solve those. I got this plugin. And so then as it gets more plugins like that, like Cole is saying, like, isn't that kind of the thing where yikes, once that genie's out of the bottle, it's kind of going to become unstoppable.
Yeah. Basically what Stephen said was that the things you can do off the top of your head as a human being are the things that it will be able to do very well. But it is not a computer, or it is not doing computations in the traditional sense, in that it is a large language model. And this is what I meant actually when I said you need to understand the system in order to generate the best outputs. So if you wanted to, I'll give you a concrete example. I was going through, and this, Bob, I was going through some life insurance policy PDFs. And so those policy PDFs had illustrations that had gaps in them in the years, because the whole illustration would be cumbersome to list out. The PDF would be too large. And so what I wanted to do was to interpolate the data between the gaps. So it would show year 35 to year 50. And so what I wanted to do was, based on the growth from year 1 to 10, I wanted to interpolate the data between year 35 and 50, right? And so if you were to ask ChatGPT to do this directly, it would try. It would do a very, very terrible job because it is not optimized to do math, just like human brains are not optimized to do math. So you have to understand this fact about the large language model. And so what I would do instead is I would tell it, generate a Python script or a JavaScript script. It's just some code, because it can write very well. Generate code to do this exact thing based on this exact input format. And then I could run the PDF through that script that it has generated, sort of in a derivative fashion, extract the optimal result. But again, understanding the nature of the system is key to getting the right outputs. And yeah, it's not a computer in the typical sense where you don't just outsource calculations to it, but in this paradigm, you outsource intelligence to it. And so with the plugins, what it can do is now, if it's intelligent enough, it can draw from various plugins, it knows what it doesn't know. And that's intelligence, right? So it knows that I don't know how to do it. And therefore, I'm going to delegate the math subroutine or process to a plugin. And then I'm going to get that result and then do something with it and maybe put in another plugin, have a multi-stage process and give you the right output. It's not going to try to do it itself. Just like if you told a smart human to generate the square root of something, right? The smart human it's not smart to be able to do it offhand immediately, not necessarily. What's intelligent, that might be smart, but what's intelligent is to take a calculator and do it and get the answer immediately. And so that's what GPT is sort of optimized for, to be intelligent the way a human is intelligent, not necessarily the way a computer is intelligent, but to work in tandem with traditional calculation and to optimize the results as a result of that.
You used an example earlier at the top of the conversation around trading sounded like an expense of, say, $1,000 a month for that same expense being $29.95 using ChatGPT. I think it would be fascinating if you could kind of unpack that in a little more granular fashion and just real world use case, like, what was the expense and how did you do it?
Yeah. And this is a business focused podcast. So this is sort of what people are probably looking for here is what can I do to implement this in my life, in my business, and extract value out of it in the most ways possible. And the ways will be, the number of ways in which you can extract value will increase over time, but there are already ways you could do it right now. And a lot of enterprises are not leveraging it. Startups are more agile like ours, Infineo. So we're able to adapt instantly like this to changes in the technological landscape and extract efficiency wherever we see it. And so we do implement that stuff. So what the example that I mentioned was, so we're paying a video editor about $1,000 or a little bit more a month to take our podcasts and to generate clips out of the podcast that are high quality, that are cut in the right format, meaning the clip does not start with a clipped word, etc., and to title those clips and to sort of intelligently understand what they need to slice out. So maybe like 18 to 20 clips per podcast. And we use those to distribute across our other social channels. And so that was a very laborious process. And it also took a week or two after the podcast is generated. And therefore, I mean, you're losing some engagement there. You're losing some freshness of the content, etc. And so that was the situation we had before these AI models became super powerful. And then so what I did was I was trying to find a solution for this. And I was thinking, I'm sure there are AI tools out there that you can use that have sort of, I mean, they're usually front-end skins with some sort of AI model like GPT-4 in the back end doing a lot of the processing. But so I found this service, and what this service does is it charges you $29 a month. And what they use is a very intelligent AI model to analyze your long form video. So it's like an hour long, for example. And it automatically identifies the interesting. And again, interesting is a very subjective word, but it's something that a human can identify very easily, which is why it lends itself very well to like a computer. If you tell it to find something interesting, it wouldn't be able to do that. So in that way, computers are dumb calculators and large language models are very intelligent, but bad at math and bad at calculation. So anyway, it extracts these clips out of a 1 hour podcast, maybe 18 of them. And it cuts, because it does have a calculation component to it, because it can use plugins. It cuts the video exactly at the point in the waveform where there is no sound, meaning you're not clipping the first word or the last word out of the clip. And what happens is you get a perfectly formed clip with an AI generated title that perfectly describes the clip under a minute long. And it picks out the best content and the most exciting pieces of content. And then it packages that neatly for you with captions. So captions are another plugin. You can plug in natural language processing. And then basically it captures those clips. You can download them in bulk for within half an hour of the episode being uploaded. So what we've done, if you want to quantify, again, like this is all very subjective. Oh, ChatGPT is going to change the world, this and that. Like these are all subjective projections, right? But you want to quantify something real. You take the amount that you were spending before and the time it was taking to produce the output. So say $1,000 and 2 weeks, right? And now we have $29, right? And this is per month, not per episode. So maybe $4,000 and then $29 and then 2 weeks per episode down to 30 minutes. And so if you look at that order of magnitude and you calculate out what the cost reduction is and the time reduction, and then also the opportunity cost reduction as a result of the time reduction, those compounding factors are, and this is just a tiny sliver of our social media efforts, right? And so imagine that extrapolated out to things that are really impacting cash flow and just cost generally. It's just, if you have an intelligent designer of these systems or somebody, and our CFO joked with me that I could start a consulting business around just AI process optimization for enterprises, right? You could make absolute bank off of that because there is so much efficiency to be had between the initial cost and the end cost. And like, if you're able to even capture some of it, see the orders of magnitude of improvement, that value that you're generating for a client, it's incredible. And so we're really practicing what we preach here at Infineo with respect to technological development and taking everything we see and applying it to our processes across the board, whether it be social, whether it be cash management, etc. Yeah, being a tech forward company, you have to do this kind of stuff. And if you want to get ahead of the game in terms of your cash flow and your mind really, and which really what all that matters at the end of the day, you have to be ahead of it all. And it's a lot to take in. It's very overwhelming at times, but it is something that's worth really diving into deep.
Just jump into there really quick. I want to just ask Zuhar a specific question about implementation of this for companies. So you think of a very well-established company that has a good budget. They could potentially pivot from a budgetary perspective to this implementation, but they're very heavy on the process side of things. They already have in-house developers. They have in-house SaaS. They have the system, this big ship that's hard to turn. So starting to implement something as novel and as innovative and as, say, intellectually heavy as this, I imagine would be hard. And then you have on the other side, a startup, to your point, which is more agile and you would think reasonably would be easier to implement something like this, but yet they don't have the, say, CTO that can actually implement this. And then because I'm thinking that I do know for a fact that you are like the 1%er out there, that startups aren't just finding people like you to coach them or point them on implementation. So how does the big company implement this? And what is the risk of not implementing this? How serious? There's challenges at the startup level. There's challenges for big companies are already operating, big ships to turn. What's the risk of not implementing this and just finding a way to do it?
Yeah. So the risk imminently, maybe within the next few months to a year, is not great, but it's not a massive risk because, your competitors are probably going to be relatively slow moving as well if you're a large enterprise. But the risk longer term, because obviously you want to be as competitive as possible, is, I think the risk is you absolutely get, and depending on the industry, obviously, because if it's a very labor heavy industry, there's not, obviously there's intellectual offloading that you could do, but you're more protected in that your process is not going to get uprooted tomorrow. But in terms of sort of very software heavy industries that are companies that are sort of enterprise focused, it's very difficult to not get your hands. It's not a problem where you can throw money at this point in time. And I always joke with my brother that whenever this sort of thing comes up, it's that you can't pay a pregnant woman to have a baby in less than 9 months, right? It's sort of thing where the supply of engineers that understand the underlying technology and are able to implement solutions in such a way that will actually be useful for you is just so low right now because it's such a new field. It's a couple months old, so people haven't been trained. So what the engineers that are doing it are very entrepreneurial minded. They're very got their hands dirty immediately in this new stuff. And those are the ones who will be able to actually implement this stuff. But there's a flip side to it where there's a positive for you as an enterprise is that you can get your own hands dirty and get ahead of the game. So if you're in a managerial position, for example, right? And I have been in a managerial position for a very long time. I've been doing a lot less coding, but I realized that, okay, if I want to get ahead of this, I really just have to get my hands dirty at this point. It's not something I can, even if I have capital to allocate, I cannot just hire somebody to do it for me because it's just, the talent is just not there yet. And so if you're able to teach yourself, and the good thing is, because this is at a higher level of abstraction than code, you can actually teach yourself to do this stuff and understand this stuff much more easily than you can if you were to have to learn to code. Paradoxically, it's actually easier to implement this stuff than it would be to actually become a full-fledged programmer, which you can hire people to do. But I'm sure there will be consulting houses that pop up around these AI process optimizations that you can use, but you might be a little bit late to the game there because I'm sure that everybody else is also eyeing these types of solutions. So part of it is just get your hands dirty, try it out, maybe listen to podcasts on it, read material on it. If you're decently intelligent, you'll be able to understand at a high level what's happening, even without learning to code. And so implementing yourself, getting ahead of your competitors as a result, figuring out what processes you can outsource intelligence to. I think one thing that's really good is to think about this as because we're used to outsourcing calculation. It's sort of second nature to us as humans that are involved in the technological world. If I need to calculate something like a complex multiplication problem, I'm not going to even try to do it in my head. I'm going to pick up my phone and put it in the calculator. That's second nature to me. So that's outsourcing calculation. We need to retrain our brains in this coming era of AI to start outsourcing intelligence. And that's something that doesn't come naturally to us because it's not something we've grown up with. So certain tasks that you're doing, you're spending 8 hours, like for example, I would spend 8 hours writing a script. I get to train my brain to say, oh, I can just make a prompt, optimize a prompt using GPT-4, and then feed that prompt back into GPT-4, how to generate the script for me in 30 seconds. And that's outsourcing intelligence, but it takes sort of a proactive approach to retraining your brain on what problems you can outsource to something or somebody else. And so I would say understanding the fact that you need to retrain in this coming era your brain to outsource intelligence to these things because they are going to be a part of life, part of daily life going forward. And then the second part is getting your hands dirty, trying these things out, figuring out what processes you can optimize, figuring out some solutions, trying to sort of set aside some free time to do that, even if you're in a managerial position. And then I guess the risks really are just being outcompeted or absolutely uprooted depending on what industry you're in. So yeah, a long-winded answer, but there is no clear cut and dry solution here. It really is sort of right now, it's the Wild West of AI. The demand is supply is going to lag demand quite significantly for a little while. Yeah.
This will take a minute to set up, but you'll see where I'm going because I'm trying to put my finger on the thing that I'm wanting you to answer here is, so yeah, I can just off the top of my head, I can just see how this could be used in all kinds of fields. Like an obvious one that popped into my head was I know there's like some lawyers that they just get into this niche where they'd like set up trusts and wills and things like that for people. You know, the clients come in, they get all the basic information. Okay, who are your next of kin? Okay, how much money you got? Okay, and they have standard forms. It's just real cookie cutter. And with this thing, I'm realizing that, well, no, once this is up and running, you would just talk to the AI would interview, you get all that facts. And then it's not just that it could produce a will that's better than 99% of what the human lawyers would do. It will do it in 30 seconds. It won't say, okay, well, thanks for your time. Nice to meet you. I got some other meetings today and I'll work on this over the weekend and get it. No, it'll just boom. And so to me, that's the thing that people aren't fully appreciating is just the speed because they're worried like, oh, are the machines better than us? Even if they're not, even if it's just even 50% percentile in terms of quality, the fact that it can do something in 10 seconds that it might take a human a week, when it gets to the point where it can crank out a novel and maybe it's not as entertaining, as intriguing as the best human novel at that point. But if it's better than half of the market and it can do it in 8 minutes, that's incredible. You know, what that'll do to the industry. So here's my question is, you know, I'm assuming you agree at least qualitatively with the kind of stuff I'm throwing out there and you can see how this is just going to completely enhance productivity in all these different sectors. Suppose everybody fully appreciated that right now and went to go do it. Would the bottleneck be that there's not enough computing power that, you know, like you got to pay, you know, subscribe? In other words, are they using like supercomputers to run the ChatGPT because it's like an equation with 100 billion parameters and whatever? And like right now, if every industry tried to do that, would the people who control that just say, sorry, and then it goes like, they charge $10,000 a minute for access to the engine? You get what I'm asking is that what the bottleneck would be right now? We have to build more hardware to run even just ChatGPT 4 on.
Have you seen NVIDIA stock recently? It's up, I think, 100% in the last 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. And part of it is that thesis, right? Like the compute is not going to be enough to support the demand because this is generalized intelligence. This is the amount of value that there is to be had here is probably greater than the amount of value that was happening in the early stages of the internet. I think that this is sort of going to be a revolution of equal or greater magnitude than that in a different way. And so I think that yes, compute is a bottleneck. I think that the market does a wonderful job of matching supply to demand, but there is always, or most of the time, there is a lag. And so during that lag period, things might get very expensive. Right now, for example, OpenAI limits you to a few calls per minute, for example, to reduce the total amount of compute that they're using across all their users. And I'll tell you, like one API call I used to process one of our papers, it was the maximum token count. So I won't describe it. Token counts are sort of like words. So we used 8,000 tokens for that. and it was the maximum allowable for their API. And it cost 25 cents for that call, which is an insanely high amount for an API call. So like in the programming world, like for a single call, 25 cents is absolutely massive. You usually pay fractions of a penny for an API call. So yes, compute is a limitation. And that's also
can
why
you explain what you mean by API call? Because I'm sure a lot of the listeners don't know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So basically, API calls is just you're calling a remote server from your local computer or phone or whatever. You're sending some data and then expecting a response back. And this actually leads into what I was going to say next, where because these models are so large, like you said, they don't fit on a phone. They don't fit on a computer. You have to have a data center and sort of a supercomputer type structure to run these models on. So what you're doing when you're using ChatGPT is you're renting a few seconds of compute on that infrastructure. And so you're renting that, and then that's what you're paying for. So you're basically sending some data, which is the text you want to input, and then it's processing that, and then it's sending you the output. And you're paying for the amount of time. And in fact, you can see 3.5 is free, but the better model, which is 4, that's the paid one, you're paying for the time you're renting on that server. Now, ideally, like the end goal of these models is that, and it's sort of the intuition with theorizing around these models is that they're very large because we're brute forcing the solution. We're brute forcing the solution to solving intelligence. They are not large because they need to be. They're large because we have things that we don't know. And if we understood what's actually happening inside that black box, we understood how to actually produce intelligence efficiently. They're very inefficient machines. It's sort of like driving a tank to get to school. It's like if a tank was the only thing you knew in the form of a vehicle, well, then you would have to do that to get to school because you need to get to school. But if you found out about bikes, right? Oh, I can drive a bike to school. Well, that's way more efficient. And so this is sort of the problem with these large models is that there's an intuition with a lot of these scientists around the real size need to achieve the same quality output. And the size potentially could be way, way smaller, but the search space is so large that we haven't figured out the solution. But in the coming decade, probably these models will become very small and the outputs will become way higher quality. And it's not dissimilar to the way that compute became exponentially more available and less expensive. So the whole Moore's law thing where it will probably apply to the efficiency of AI models. And then maybe one day you'll have it on your phone and your phone can do the processing. You don't have to make an API call to a server. You don't have to rent time on their server. It lives on your phone. And in that world, there's substantially less limitations on the amount of tasks that you can outsource to the AI because there's no bottleneck on compute. And the explosion in GDP as a result will be absolutely massive, I think. But for now, at this present moment in time, these models are huge, inefficient. We don't know what the solution is. And therefore we have to rent these massive server times. And that's why NVIDIA stock is just skyrocketing. So
I love the tank and the bike analogy. I really wish I could have taken a tank to school. That would be awesome.
Everybody would talk.
Yeah.
Right? Oh man. I asked earlier, what would it look like if a supercomputer and ChatGPT had a child? I loved your answer. So what would it look like if ChatGPT and the blockchain had a child? And the reason I ask is because Bob's question about trust and being able to spit out these trusts, say as a structured financial product, so quickly and efficiently. To do that, would you need a blockchain integration, or is that even a good blockchain use case to spit out a structured product? Can you do it without the blockchain? I guess is my question. Or do you need the blockchain for ChatGPT to say replace a lawyer?
Yeah. So really the bottleneck in that whole process is the physicality, the sort of wet ink analog nature of transactions and sort of processes as they exist today. I foresee in the next decade, probably a lot of these things being highly digitized as a result of massive efficiencies that are gained by digitization. And I mean, that's what we're doing to the life insurance industry at Infineo, where we're just absolutely digitizing the whole thing because there are so many efficiencies to be had in extracting sort of that, doing the arbitrage between the analog and the digital, all that value that's there in the inefficiencies. But to answer your question directly, basically, blockchains provide a quantitative sort of code-based platform that operate independent of human error, independent of human friction, independent of physical inefficiencies, etc. And so what they all say, which will probably help you understand the bigger picture of this marriage, is that blockchains are the native operating system for AI. And what that means is that AI exists right now in a weird place where it can do a lot of things, but it's hamstrung by the fact that a lot of processes have to go through analog real world sort of pipes in order to be completed. So the legal thing is one example. For example, marketplace transactions for life insurance policies are another, right? And so, like, for example, the ownership change of a life insurance policy can take a long time. You have to wet egg, all that kind of stuff. And so if these things were digitized and they were represented as tokens on the blockchain, and tokens on the blockchain just mean that the ownership is verifiable by somebody. So blockchain is just distributed ledgers. Then everything becomes programmatic. And then the blockchain becomes a plugin for the AI system. And the AI system can say, oh, I need to make a payment to this party in order to achieve this goal. So for example, you wanted to be able to process some data or make an API call, do some data processing. The AI will make that API call to the server, pay the fee. But how does it pay the fee? Well, because even money right now, even though it's sort of digitized, it's really not. Like the settlement layer is not digital. It's very much analog. And so the rails, when the rails that these things are transacting on top of become actually digitally native, which is a term we use a lot, and it means sort of really becoming digital, not just plaster and sort of band-aid digital, which is the way that the current economic system works. That is the day when the AI can actually complete end-to-end from prompt to finish in 30 seconds, a full task involving a payment, involving ownership change, involving transactions, and actually participating in the economy autonomously. And so the bottleneck here is really just the wet ink analog part in the middle, where now you're waiting a week for someone to get back to you, and then the AI can continue. Well, that's really inefficient. And just the pressures that the economy, the marketplace puts on inefficiencies generally are going to sort of weed out those processes as we go forward. And part of our goal here at Infineo is to be the company that captures a lot of the value that comes from those processes becoming digitized. And the blockchain is an integral part of it. Now, whether it be this blockchain or this format or that format, that's to be seen, like which one becomes the most prominent, which one becomes the most used and adopted. But in terms of the concept, just think about digitally native money ownership transactions. That is what an economy is built on property ownership, transactions, etc. And so if you shift that from the analog layer to a digital layer, now AI can interact directly with it at the speed of light. So as data is transferred. Whereas if you have it on a lower layer in the analog world, the AI can do some things at the speed of light, but then it has to wait for a response from here. That when that response comes, then it can transact at the speed of light again. So it's just very inefficient the way things are done today. And it's inevitable that things are going to change. And are you going to be at the forefront of that change? Well, at Infineo, we decided that we are. And that's why we are a technology company as well as a life insurance company. And that's sort of our vision here. So, yeah.
Z, just to continue with that vision, am I thinking about this the right way that, let's say 20 years from now, it will be something like there will still be like huge company, from our perspective, quadrillion-dollar companies that have warehouses of hardware that run the equivalent of like ChatGPT 20, whereas the handheld devices that people are walking around or on their hoverboards or floating around with whatever run GPT 10, and that's just right on your phone. Who wouldn't even call it a phone probably anymore, whatever they call that thing, or the chip that's in your head that Elon Musk is putting in everybody's head, right? And so those things, and then there would be just different layers, and so, yeah, like a lot of the just standard stuff that you would want to do would be on your local thing, but then there would still be these high powered. And then in terms of like global commerce, yeah, maybe it would be Bitcoin, maybe it'd be some other digital assets that rise in prominence because of their various attributes. And it would be these like heavy hitter machines ensuring honesty, because like there wouldn't just be one. Like if there were just one company with the warehouse that had the ChatGPT 20, it could just brute force and just, double spend whatever. But there would be other ones too. And then the way the protocols work, like as more computing power gets into the network in terms of mining, that they kind of offset each other, or the difficulty gets adjusted, so that as long as there was some competition and there were rival companies and things like that, would kind of ensure that the system itself was honest. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, that is a plausible scenario if we're all still alive by then, and if AI hasn't just launched all the
Okay, yeah.
nukes.
Assuming we're not all dead, is that okay? Yeah.
Yes, actually, I mean, it's funny
Yeah.
that
See,
the
I don't care if the robots kill us all. That's fine. I just don't want them stealing from each other. That would make me feel bad. So I just want to make sure.
Yeah. It's funny that the fundamental principles of economics hold even at these magnitudes of sort of progress and intelligence, et cetera. Like, imagine competition between AI, such a fundamental principle, competition leading to better consumer choices, et cetera. I mean, I would theorize that, yes, I mean, competition between models, competition between sort of different architectures to sort of, if you put in one prompt here, it generates one result. If you put in one prompt here, it generates a different result. And then those results would compete. So assuming that like that in between maybe is a governmental structure and there's some decision or some massive sort of process that's going on there. I think that, yeah, competition would be good between systems, but I also think that there is also this economies of scale thing that tends to occur even with technology companies and organizations where, and you see Google now is sort of consumed a lot of, whenever they see an up and comer, they'll just acquire. So who knows whether we'll have that competition. Ideally we would in that world, but hopefully we're allowed to see it.
I'm pretty blown away by this conversation. I know that I think I've learned more in this podcast than I have, and I get the privilege of working closely with you every day. I think you're going to be a regular guest here. I think we just kind of scratched the surface and dug into some really tangible things. Bob, do you have any final thoughts for Zuhar, or questions? Or
Yeah, again, if you could just maybe give, like you said, as a recommendation for business owners right now, they should go. Can you point them to specific, like we mentioned, Stephen Wolfram? Should they go try to dig up interviews he's done, like on Lex Friedman's show, and he just did the Tom Woods show? Like, is that a good starting place in terms of for them to, like you say, they got to get their hands dirty, they got to understand how this stuff works?
Yeah, I think part of it is understanding the high level, and part of the high. I guess you want to proceed down the process from a high level perspective, and then mid level and low level. So high level would be listening to podcasts, reading material on how it works. Stephen Wolfram is a great resource. Spoken a lot about the topic. And then I would say that I guess part of it would be after you understand what this thing is and how it works, just open it up and think about certain problems you have in your business that you could outsource if you had a super intelligence secretary, for example. You could think about these problems, maybe write them down as prompts, and then put them into GPT-4 and say, how do I solve this problem? See what it responds. And then you sort of get an understanding for its capabilities, its intelligence. Now, again, there's a lot of things that you can't just automate away immediately. You have to structure your system in such a way that like you get a sort of plan of action, and then it'll probably do a lot of the step-by-step breakdown for you to optimize a process, for example. And then you can implement that in your business potentially. So right now, GPT-4, I think passes the bar with, I think in 90th percentile or something. So it is very intelligent as a companion, and you can use it to solve business problems, even if not directly. If it's not going in and directly automating something, it could give you suggestions. So maybe something you've been toying around in your mind for a while. How do I optimize this process in my business? Ask it and see what it tells you. So that's maybe the mid-level. That's the second step. And figure out what you can do with advice. So an AI advisor, custom for your business. And then the third step, maybe in actually implementing, might be to actually try and get your hands on with telling you to write you a script for something. So for example, if I wanted to capitalize all the letter T in a document of 100 pages, I could ask it to write a script for that. And even if I don't know how to code, I can input it into the script. I don't have to read the script, and it will output for a simple task like that. It'll output the document. And that saves you. I mean, if you're going to do manual labor like that, right? As a manager, I know a lot of people that really do that kind of stuff, and they shouldn't be doing it because now they can outsource it. And so if that saves you 2 hours of your time, you could allocate that 2 hours of your time to something else that's more productive. And if you're in a large enterprise, probably your time is worth a lot of money. So those are some concrete tips. Obviously, there's a lot more, and I'd have to think about it more to sort of give you a more comprehensive answer. But right now, it is the Wild West. And part of it is just being intelligent, being smart, getting your hands dirty, and testing it out, really. That's what I'd say.
Folks, our guest has been the Infineo CTO, Zuhayr Rashid. Zuhar, thanks for your time. And Cole and I, folks, will see you all next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for having me.
This concludes another episode of the Founders Forum. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the hosts and for previous episodes, visit foundersforum.io. Thanks for listening.